My name is Janelle, and this Christmas dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of laughter, warmth, and family traditions. But sitting at the table that night, I felt a storm brewing inside me, a tension so palpable it was as if the air had thickened. You see, I had brought something with me that would change everything, a simple envelope that held the weight of my decision. This is only for family, they had said, as if family ties were more than just blood, as if love was a currency that could be spent, hoarded, or withheld. But as I looked around the table at my relatives, I realized that love alone couldn't pay the rent or erase the years of resentment that had built up like cobwebs in the corners of my heart. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know below. The festive lights twinkled like stars as I pulled up to my parents' house, the familiar scent of pine mingling with my anxiety. Growing up, Christmas had been magical, a time when my siblings and I would wait with bated breath for Santa to come. But as adults, the magic had faded, and what remained was a complicated web of obligations. I had spent months contemplating my next move, all while trying to suppress the gnawing feeling that I was being taken advantage of by the very people who should have had my back. The table was set beautifully, with a perfectly roasted turkey at the center and an assortment of sides that my mother had prepared with love. My family members were chatting and laughing, their faces lit up by the glow of the holiday spirit. Yet, as I took my seat, the weight of the envelope in my bag felt heavier than ever. It was a notice, my last resort, a decision I had made after countless sleepless nights. I had decided to evict my brother Jake from the house he had been living in rent-free for over 2 years. It wasn't just about the money, though that was a significant part of it, but about respect, responsibility, and the realization that I needed to take control of my life. Jake had been my partner in crime since childhood, but now he was more like a shadow, always hanging around, refusing to grow up. He had moved into the house I inherited from our grandmother after she passed away, promising to help with the upkeep. Yet, as the months turned into years, I found myself carrying the burden alone, with Jake's contributions dwindling to nothing but empty promises and late-night excuses. As I sat there watching my family revel in holiday cheer, I felt a pang of guilt clawing at my insides. Was I really about to ruin this joyful occasion with my ultimatum? But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had sacrificed too much and bent over backward, hoping he would change. But that day had never come. Instead, I had become the family's reluctant bank, the one who always said yes, who always did more than her fair share. The moment I had been dreading finally arrived when my dad raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, his voice booming with pride. "May we always be there for each other." My heart raced as I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. I could no longer sit in silence. This was my chance to speak up. As I cleared my throat, I felt the room shift. The laughter faded, and all eyes turned to me. A sea of expectant faces. "I have something to say," I began, my voice trembling. "I know we're all here to celebrate, but I need to address something important." I could see my brother shift uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting towards my parents, trying to gauge their reaction. "I've decided it's time for a change," I continued, my heart pounding. "Jake, I can't keep supporting you like this. You need to find your own place. I'm handing you this eviction notice." I pulled the envelope from my bag and laid it on the table, the rustling paper echoing like thunder in the silence that followed. The shock in the room was palpable, and I could feel the weight of my family's judgment pressing down on me. My mother's face turned a shade of crimson, and my father looked as if I had just declared war. "What are you doing, Janelle?" my dad asked, his voice low and filled with disbelief. "This is Christmas. You're tearing our family apart." But I couldn't back down. "I'm not trying to tear us apart. I'm trying to save myself," I said, my voice steadying. "Family doesn't mean ignoring the reality of our situation. I love Jake, but he needs to learn responsibility. I can't keep enabling him." The table erupted into chaos, voices clashing as family members sided with either my brother or me. I had expected some backlash, but the intensity of their responses caught me off guard. It was as if I had unleashed a whirlwind, and now I was left standing in the eye of the storm, uncertain about what would happen next. I wondered if I had made the right decision, if family loyalty really meant blind support, or if it could also mean tough love. As the arguments swirled around me, I felt a mix of anger and fear. Had I really just drawn a line in the sand? I had never wanted to be the villain in this story, but it felt like I was forced into that role. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. What had I done? Would I be the one who ruined Christmas? Or would this be the beginning of something necessary? As I sat there, absorbing the chaos I had created, I realized that this moment was just the beginning of a much larger journey. I could only hope that my family would one day understand my choice, even if it meant facing their anger and disappointment in the short term. How many of you have faced tough choices with your family? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. I sat in the silence that followed my outburst, trying to gather my thoughts. The air was thick with tension, every breath feeling like a weighted decision. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched my phone, the eviction notice still crumpled in my grip. I never imagined I would find myself in this position, feeling like a pariah at my own family's Christmas dinner. The faces around the table, once warm and familiar, now felt like a jury, each one weighing my actions and motives. My sister, Lily, was the first to break the silence. She looked at me with a mix of disbelief and concern, her brow furrowed as if she were trying to solve a complex equation. "Did you really have to do this now, at Christmas?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the hurt in her eyes, and it pierced through me like a dagger. "I couldn't just sit back and watch him take advantage of you all," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's been living rent-free in that house for far too long. I thought family was supposed to help each other, but sometimes that means making hard decisions." Lily shook her head, clearly frustrated. "You could have talked to him first. You didn't have to go straight for the eviction notice." "Talking has gotten us nowhere," I said, the edge creeping back into my tone. "He doesn't listen, and every time I try, it's the same old excuses. I'm tired of enabling him." The room fell quiet again, the clinking of forks and the murmur of conversation stifled. I could feel eyes darting between us, trying to gauge the outcome of this family drama. Uncle Joe cleared his throat, attempting to diffuse the situation. "Maybe we should take a moment to calm down. Christmas is about family, after all." Family. It was a word that felt heavy with irony in that moment. I glanced at my parents, who sat at the head of the table, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and confusion. My mom's eyes glistened, betraying the depth of her emotions, while my dad stared at his plate, lost in thought. I knew they were grappling with their own feelings about what had just unfolded, but I didn't have time to process their reactions. I had to stand my ground. As the dinner progressed, the conversations around the table felt strained and forced. The laughter that typically filled the air was replaced with awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at cheer. I could see my brother Mike trying to lighten the mood with jokes that fell flat, his usual charm overshadowed by the cloud of tension hanging over us. At one point, someone attempted to bring up the holiday traditions we had cherished over the years, the cookie baking, the caroling, the late-night movie marathons. But those memories felt tainted now, overshadowed by the reality of my decision. I realized how deeply the roots of family loyalty ran, yet here I was, pulling them up by the roots with my actions. Still, I knew I wasn't wrong. I thought about the countless times my family had rallied around my brother, supporting him through his ups and downs, his myriad of failed attempts to get his life on track. It was like trying to fill a bucket with holes. I wanted to believe that tough love was the answer, that maybe this eviction would be the wake-up call he needed. As I looked around the table, I noticed the way my family interacted differently with me now. Their warmth seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a cautious distance. I felt like an outsider in my own home, a role I never wanted to play. I tried to push the guilt away and focus on the purpose behind my actions. After dinner, as everyone began to clear the table, I slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. The crisp winter night wrapped around me like a blanket, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I stared up at the stars, their brightness shining against the dark canvas of the night sky, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this decision would eventually lead to something better for everyone involved. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my family's holiday traditions. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Would they ever understand? Or would this be a rift too wide to bridge? Suddenly, I heard the door creak open behind me. It was Lily, her silhouette framed by the warm light spilling from the house. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I nodded and motioned for her to join me outside. We walked to the edge of the yard, our breaths mingling in the cold air, and I sensed the vulnerability between us. "I just don't get why you had to do it like this," she said, her eyes searching mine for answers. "Can't you see how this affects everyone?" "I see it, Lily, I do. But sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most growth. I can't keep watching him drag everyone down. But what if he turns his life around? What if this is the push he needs? She countered, her tone softer now but laced with concern. I sighed, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. I hope that's true. But the reality is, he hasn't shown any signs of changing, and I'm afraid if we keep enabling him, it'll only get worse. She looked down at her feet, her expression a mixture of empathy and frustration. I just wish there was another way. So do I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, but I felt like I had to do something. We stood there in silence for a moment, the chill of the night wrapping around us, a stark reminder of the distance that had suddenly grown between us. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that this decision had created a fissure in our family. But as I gazed up at the stars, I held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this storm would eventually pass, and we would emerge stronger on the other side. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I walked around my home like a ghost, each room echoing with memories of happier times, family gatherings filled with laughter and warmth. Now those same walls felt heavy with the weight of my decision. I tried to focus on work, but every time I sat down at my desk, my mind wandered back to that conversation with my sister. It was as if I had opened a floodgate of doubts and fears, and I couldn't quite close it. I thought about the eviction notice I had delivered to my brother, how it felt like a betrayal even as I knew it was necessary. I replayed the moment in my mind, the way his eyes widened in disbelief, the way he had stammered, searching for words that would sway me, words that never came. The reality was hard to swallow, but it was the truth. He had been living rent-free in my home for too long, and it was time for him to take responsibility for his life. As the days turned into a week, I began to notice changes in the atmosphere of our family gatherings. At first, it was subtle. A lingering silence when my brother's name was mentioned, a few awkward glances exchanged over the dinner table. My parents were trying to tiptoe around the elephant in the room, but I could feel the tension thickening with each passing day. One Saturday, we had planned a family barbecue. The smell of grilled burgers wafted through the air, mingling with the laughter of my younger cousins playing tag in the backyard. I tried to immerse myself in the moment, but my mind was elsewhere. I could see my sister chatting with our parents, her gestures animated as she likely recounted our last conversation. I felt a pang of guilt that I had put her in this position, caught between her loyalty to me and her desire to support our brother. When I finally mustered the courage to join the conversation, I felt a shift in the energy. My mother caught my eye, her expression a mix of concern and disappointment. "We're just worried about him, you know," she said softly, as if the words themselves could soothe the situation. "I get that, Mom, but it's not about him right now. It's about what we need to do for ourselves too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But he's family, we should help him," my sister interjected, her frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "I want to help him, but enabling him isn't the answer." The words felt heavy on my tongue, and I could see the hurt they caused in her eyes. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wrestling with my thoughts. I knew my family loved my brother, but I was starting to question if love alone was enough to save him. I thought about the times I had covered for him, the countless excuses I had made to friends and family when he let me down. Hadn't I been trying to protect him by shielding him from the consequences of his actions? The next day, I decided it was time for a heart-to-heart with my brother. I knew I had to do it face-to-face to look him in the eye and explain why I was taking this stand. I invited him over, trying to keep my tone light. But inside, I was a bundle of nerves. When he walked through the door, I was reminded of how much I missed the brother I used to know, the one who laughed easily, who was full of dreams and ambition. Now he looked like a shadow of his former self, the weight of his choices etched on his face. "Hey," I greeted him, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Hey," he replied, his voice flat. He sank into the couch and I took a seat across from him, the distance feeling like a chasm between us. "I wanted to talk about everything," I began, unsure of how to navigate the conversation. "What's there to talk about? You've made your choice," he said, bitterness dripping from his words. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I know it might seem that way, but I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I care about you. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay." He scoffed. "You think kicking me out is caring? That's the opposite of love." I could feel my heart racing, but I pressed on. "It's tough, love. I've been enabling you, and that's not helping you. You need to find your own path again. You can't keep relying on me forever." He was silent for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "You don't get it," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've lost everything. I don't know how to start over. I felt a pang of empathy. I know it feels overwhelming, but you have to try. You're stronger than you think. You just need to take that first step. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of the brother I used to know. But then it faded, replaced by despair. What if I can't? I reached out, my hand resting on his. Then let me help you find the resources you need. There are programs, support groups. You don't have to do this alone. Our eyes locked, and I could see the struggle within him. He wanted to believe me, but the shadows of his choices were holding him back. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. I realized then that my journey wouldn't be just about standing firm in my decision. It would also be about being there for him in a new way, one that encouraged his independence instead of stifling it. We were both navigating a new landscape of our relationship, one that was uncertain but necessary. As I reflected on our conversation, I wondered if I had done enough. Would he take the steps he needed to turn his life around? I hoped that the eviction notice would serve as a wake-up call, not just a final straw. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. I found myself replaying our talk over and over, searching for signs that he was starting to change. I wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption, but the path was fraught with doubt. I began to notice subtle changes in him that I hadn't seen before. He started to wake up earlier, and instead of staying in bed until noon, he'd be in the kitchen, brewing coffee and listening to the news. It was a small shift, but it felt monumental. I would pass through the living room and catch him watching documentaries, something he used to scoff at, claiming they were boring. He seemed to be actively seeking knowledge and inspiration, perhaps trying to find a way out of the rut he'd been in for so long. Yet, as hopeful as I felt, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety that settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. I wanted to believe he was truly trying, but I also knew that real change took time and commitment. I often found myself walking that thin line between encouragement and skepticism. I wanted to be supportive, to cheer him on, but I also didn't want to ignore the reality of his past behaviors. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, he walked into the kitchen, a hint of nervousness on his face. "Hey, do you think we could talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced. Was this the moment I had both dreaded and longed for? I nodded, and we moved to the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about needing to change," he started, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I realized that I've been running from my problems instead of facing them. I want to do better, for myself, for you, for everyone. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to show how much hope was swelling in my chest. "That's a good start," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Acknowledging it is the first step." He took a deep breath as if preparing to dive into deep water. "I want to go back to school. I've always wanted to finish my degree, but I let everything else distract me. I think that if I focus on that, it'll help me get my life back on track." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "That's a great idea. What do you think your first step should be?" "I guess I need to look into community colleges, see what programs they offer. I might also need to get a job to help pay for classes, but I'm willing to do that," he responded, a spark of determination igniting in his eyes. As we talked about the logistics of it all, I realized just how much I had missed this, having open, honest conversations filled with potential rather than defeat. It was a breath of fresh air, even if the path ahead was still clouded with uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, I watched him transform. He applied to schools, filled out job applications, and even attended a couple of interviews. Each small victory felt like a monumental achievement, and I was right there cheering him on. I could see him becoming more confident, more alive. The shadows of his past choices still lingered, but they were starting to fade as he stepped into this new chapter. But with every step forward, I felt the weight of my own decision bearing down on me. The eviction notice was still hanging like a specter, reminding us both that time was ticking away. I had given him a deadline, and while I wanted to believe that change was real, I couldn't ignore the possibility that he might not be ready when the time came. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard him talking to himself in the living room. I crept out quietly, trying not to disturb him. I peeked around the corner and saw him standing in front of the mirror, going over interview questions. I could hear him practicing his responses, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a moment that filled me with pride. I wanted to rush in and hug him, to tell him how far he had come, but I also knew that this was a journey he had to take on his own. As I retreated back to my room, I wondered if he even realized how far he had come in such a short time. I wanted to believe in his potential, but deep down, a nagging worry lingered. Would he be able to maintain this momentum? Would he fall back into old habits when the going got tough? Days turned into weeks, and he continued to push forward. I noticed he started to cut down on his late-night gaming sessions, prioritizing studying instead. It was inspiring to see him take charge of his life, but I still felt a cloud of uncertainty hovering over us. Then came the day of his first job interview. I could see the nervous energy radiating off him. "What if they don't like me?" he asked, biting his lip. I reminded him that it was just one step in a much larger process. They're not judging your entire life based on one interview. Just be yourself and show them what you've been working on. He nodded, but I could still see the doubt in his eyes. As he left for the interview, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I wanted him to succeed, but I was also terrified of what would happen if he didn't. When he returned later that day, I could tell immediately that something was off. His shoulders were slumped, and there was a heaviness to his steps. "How did it go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice upbeat, but my heart sank as I awaited his response. "I didn't get it. They said I didn't have enough experience," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The disappointment was palpable. I wanted to wrap my arms around him and make everything better, but I knew that wasn't the answer. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But this doesn't define you. It's just one opportunity. There will be others." He nodded, but I could see the walls starting to go back up, the doubt creeping in once more. The question was, how could I help him find the strength to keep going? I had always believed in the power of resilience, but watching him struggle made me feel powerless. It wasn't enough to just tell him to keep trying. He needed to feel it in his bones. I decided it was time for a little tough love, a little nudge back into the ring. "How about we brainstorm some ways to build your experience?" I suggested, hoping to spark that fire within him again. His eyes flickered with a hint of interest, but they dimmed almost immediately. "Like what?" "I can't just magically gain experience overnight," he said, frustration creeping into his tone. I understood his cynicism. I'd been there myself, standing at the crossroads of ambition and reality, wondering if I was simply chasing dreams that would never materialize. "Well, what about volunteering?" I proposed, trying to keep the conversation light. "There are always organizations looking for help, and it could be a great way to meet new people and learn new skills." I watched as the gears turned in his mind, slowly processing the idea. "I guess," he replied, though it sounded more like a reluctant acceptance than genuine enthusiasm. I wanted to push him further, to ignite that spark, but I knew better than to force it. Sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought silently within oneself. That evening, I watched him retreat into his world, glued to his phone, scrolling through social media, his fingers tapping away as he absorbed everyone else's successes and happiness. I wanted to shake him and say, "Look at yourself. You are capable of so much more." But I held back. I reminded myself that sometimes the best support I could give was to simply be there, ready to listen when he was ready to talk. Days turned into weeks, and I could see the toll the rejection had taken on him. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and I worried that the weight of his thoughts was becoming a burden too heavy to bear. I tried to coax him out of his shell with little distractions, movie nights, cooking experiments, even starting a small garden in our backyard. I wanted him to see that life was still happening, still full of potential, but I could feel the distance growing between us. Then came the day when I received a message that brought everything to a halt. It was from my sister, Sarah, and she wanted to host a family dinner. As soon as I read the message, a wave of dread washed over me. Family dinners had become a mixed bag of emotions over the years, especially since my parents had passed. It was a time filled with love, but also with the pressure of expectations and, more importantly, judgment. "Do you think we should go?" I asked him that evening, trying to gauge his feelings. He didn't look up from his phone, and I could see the tension in his jaw. "I mean, it might be good for you to get out, see some family," I continued, hoping to persuade him. "Or it could be a circus full of questions I don't want to answer," he replied, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were filled with resentment and an undercurrent of fear. I couldn't blame him. Family gatherings often felt like a spotlight shining down on our insecurities. What if they start asking about my job situation again, or worse, about my future? I could relate. I had felt that pressure many times myself. "I'll be there with you," I promised, "and we can keep it light." We don't have to dive into anything heavy." After much deliberation, he reluctantly agreed. We arrived at Sarah's house, and I could feel the anticipation in the air. The scents of roasted turkey and spiced cranberry sauce wafted through the open door, and I reminded myself that this was a time for family, for connection. As we stepped inside, we were greeted by the familiar sights of our childhood: decorations, laughter, and the warm glow of the fireplace. But as the evening unfolded, I could see the tension in his shoulders returning. Sarah's husband, Mark, was the first to break the ice. "So, how's the job search going?" he asked, his tone casual, but the question loaded with implications. I felt my stomach knot. "It's going," my partner replied, his voice lacking the confidence it usually had. "Oh, I know how that is," Mark said, clearly oblivious to the discomfort in the room. "I remember when I was in your shoes. Just keep pushing through. You'll find something." The conversation shifted, but I could see my partner's face fall. As the night wore on, I watched as different family members took turns sharing their successes, new jobs, promotions, and personal achievements. Each story felt like a dagger to his heart, and I could see him retreating further into himself. When the meal ended, I excused us from the table, taking him aside into the dimly lit living room. "Hey, I know this is tough, but you're not alone in this," I said gently, trying to reassure him. "It's okay to feel how you feel. Everyone's journey is different." He sighed heavily, looking down at his hands. "It just feels like I'm stuck, you know? Like I'm supposed to have it all figured out, but I don't." "I get it," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But can I just remind you that not everyone has it figured out, even if it looks that way? It's okay to be a work in progress." As the evening came to a close, I could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. I wanted to take that weight away, but I knew that was something he had to do for himself. As we walked back to the car, I felt a deep sense of empathy for him, wishing I could just give him a glimpse of the strength I saw in him. Sometimes, all we needed was a reminder that we could take one step at a time, even when the path ahead seemed shrouded in shadows. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. I could see the city lights flickering in the rearview mirror, each one a reminder of the bustling life I was part of but often felt disconnected from. My mind drifted back to the conversation I'd just had with my cousin. It was heartbreaking to see him struggle, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had said enough to lift his spirits. I had always been the one in the family who tried to provide comfort, the one everyone turned to during difficult times, but I felt like I was running out of words. The truth was, I was still learning how to be there for others while figuring out my own life too. When I got home, the familiar scent of my lavender candles filled the air, but it did little to soothe me. I kicked off my shoes and made my way to the kitchen, needing something to ground me. I opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, taking a long swig as I leaned against the counter. The reflection staring back at me seemed weary. I had spent so much of my time trying to hold everyone else up that I had neglected my own needs. It was a pattern I recognized all too well, one that I was determined to break. I tossed the empty bottle into the recycling bin and wandered into the living room. My eyes fell on the eviction notice I had been avoiding. It was a stark reminder of the reality I was facing, one that threatened to unravel everything I had worked for. I had lived in that house for nearly a decade, pouring my soul into creating a home. It wasn't just a structure. It was a sanctuary filled with memories, laughter, and tears. How could I possibly let it go? I took a deep breath and picked up the notice, reading it over once more. It was clear, direct, and chilling. The landlord had given me a deadline, and while I had been putting off facing it, I knew the day of reckoning was approaching. I had grown up hearing the phrase, "This is only for family," whispered by my parents during holiday gatherings, and now it felt like a cruel joke. Family. It was supposed to mean support, love, and safety. But in that moment, it felt more like a burden. I sank into the couch, staring at the framed photographs hanging on the wall. Each one told a story, a chapter of my life that I cherished. I recalled the laughter we shared during family dinners, the warmth of my mother's hugs, and the silly games we played during the holidays. It was hard to reconcile those moments with the tension that had recently filled our gatherings. Ever since my parents had decided to stop helping me financially, the dynamics had shifted. They often reminded me that, as an adult, I needed to take care of my own problems. But how was I supposed to manage it all alone when I felt so lost? As the days turned into weeks, I decided to take action. I started looking for other options, scouring the internet for resources and support. I spoke with friends who had gone through similar situations, gathering advice and tips. I even reached out to a local organization that offered assistance to those facing eviction. They were incredibly supportive, providing me with resources and guidance, but I still felt the weight of impending doom looming over me. One afternoon, after a long day of searching for potential new homes, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop with a friend. It was a cozy little place, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft chatter of patrons. My friend Sam was a ray of sunshine in my otherwise cloudy world. She always knew how to lift my spirits and offer a fresh perspective. I just don't understand how it got to this point, I confessed, stirring my drink absent-mindedly. I thought I was doing everything right. I worked hard, paid my bills on time, and yet here I am, staring down the barrel of eviction. Sam took a sip of her latte, her expression thoughtful. You know, sometimes life throws curveballs at us that we just can't anticipate. It's not a reflection of your worth or your efforts. You're doing the best you can with what you have. Her words struck a chord. I had been so focused on the negatives that I had failed to acknowledge the strength I had shown throughout this ordeal. I had fought tooth and nail to keep my home, to maintain some semblance of stability in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. I appreciate that. But it's so hard to stay positive when you feel like you're losing everything, I said, my voice tinged with frustration. I just wish I could see a way out of this. Sam leaned in closer, her eyes piercing through the fog of my despair. What if you shift your focus? Instead of thinking about what you're losing, think about what you could gain. This might be the nudge you need to create something new and better for yourself. Her suggestion lingered in my mind. What if this was a chance for me to break free from the expectations that had been placed on me? I had spent my entire life trying to meet the standards set by my family, but maybe it was time to forge my own path. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I left the coffee shop that day, I felt a spark of hope igniting within me. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I was determined to take it one step at a time. I wouldn't let fear dictate my future. I would find a way to turn this challenge into an opportunity for growth and transformation. It was time to reclaim my life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. I was riding the highs and lows of uncertainty. Each day felt like a blank canvas, and I was the artist with a palette of vibrant colors, unsure of how to mix them. I decided to take Sam's advice to heart. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I forced myself to look for the possibilities that lay ahead. I began to write down my thoughts, my fears, and my dreams. It was a cathartic exercise, a way to pour out my soul onto the pages and give shape to my nebulous hopes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, I sat on my porch with my notebook. The warm breeze ruffled the pages as I scribbled my aspirations. I wanted to travel. I wanted to start a blog, share my stories, and inspire others who might be feeling lost, just like I was. But the most daunting question lingered in the back of my mind. Could I really take that leap? I glanced up at the sky, seeking some kind of sign. What would you do if you had nothing holding you back? I whispered to the wind, hoping for an answer. Weeks rolled into months, and life continued its relentless march forward. I found myself in a routine that was both comforting and terrifying. My days were filled with work, but I made it a point to carve out time for my new passion project. I delved into researching travel destinations, learning about different cultures, and connecting with like-minded individuals online. Every click, every new piece of information, fueled my excitement. I even started drafting blog posts about my experiences, weaving in my struggles and triumphs. But there were moments of self-doubt that crept in like uninvited guests. I would stare at the blank screen, the cursor blinking at me like a judgmental eye. Who am I to think I can inspire anyone? I would think. But then I remembered Sam's words. This was about more than just me. It was about sharing a journey, a connection, and perhaps encouraging someone else to find their own path. One evening, I decided to attend a local meetup for aspiring bloggers and travelers. It was nerve-wracking. I stood outside the venue for what felt like an eternity, battling the butterflies in my stomach. What if no one wanted to talk to me? What if my ideas fell flat? But deep down, I knew I had to push through. After all, wasn't this the very essence of transformation? Facing fears head-on? As I stepped inside, the atmosphere was electric. People were laughing, sharing stories, and exchanging ideas. I took a deep breath and joined a small circle of women discussing their travel adventures. They were so passionate and animated, and as I listened, I felt a rush of inspiration. One woman shared her experience of backpacking through Southeast Asia, and I was captivated. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I could see myself in her words. After a few minutes of listening, I found the courage to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Mia. I'm hoping to start a travel blog and share my journey," I said, my voice a mix of excitement and nerves. To my surprise, they welcomed me with open arms, asking questions and sharing their own experiences. It was as if I had found a tribe, a community of people who understood my aspirations and fears. As the night wore on, I shared snippets of my story, including my recent struggles. I was met with nods of understanding and empathy. It felt good to be vulnerable. "Have you ever felt like you were on the brink of something amazing, but were just too scared to leap?" I asked, and I was met with a chorus of affirmations. It was liberating to realize that I wasn't alone in my fears. In the weeks following that meetup, I felt a shift within myself. I was no longer just a spectator in my life. I was becoming an active participant. I reached out to fellow bloggers, seeking advice and forming connections. I even booked a weekend trip to a nearby city, determined to start documenting my experiences. I wanted to capture the beauty around me and share it with others. But there were still moments when doubt would creep in, whispering insidiously in my ear. One afternoon, I was sitting in a quaint cafe, sipping my coffee while I worked on my blog. I looked around at the other patrons, each lost in their own world. What if this isn't enough? I thought, my heart racing. What if I'm not good enough to stand out? That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to find a woman smiling warmly at me. "Hey, I just wanted to say that I love your energy. Are you a writer?" she asked. My heart soared. After a brief chat, she introduced herself as Tessa, an established travel blogger. We exchanged contact information, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. Maybe this was my path after all, filled with connections and possibilities. Tessa became a mentor of sorts, guiding me through the blogging world and helping me hone my voice. Each conversation left me feeling empowered. I realized that this journey wasn't just about travel. It was about finding my identity outside of the expectations that had burdened me for so long. As I poured more of myself into my blog, I felt a shift in my perspective. Instead of viewing my past struggles as limitations, I began to see them as chapters in my story that shaped who I was. Every bump in the road was a lesson learned, a stepping stone toward my new life. Now, as I look back on these moments of transformation, I wonder about others on similar journeys. What would you have done if you found the courage to step into the unknown? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. This path has been anything but easy, but I finally felt like I was becoming the person I was meant to be. Each day was a new adventure, and I was ready to embrace it all. I remember one particular afternoon when I was sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating my laptop screen. I had just hit publish on a blog post that felt like a significant milestone for me. It was an honest piece about the struggles of balancing familial expectations and personal desires, something that had often haunted me. I shared my fears, my dreams, and the painful moments that led to my eviction from that life I once thought was secure. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I clicked that button. A few days later, I received an email from a reader who identified with my story. She shared her own struggles, how she too felt suffocated by the expectations of her family, how she was constantly trying to meet their standards while losing herself in the process. It was a raw and heartfelt message, and I felt an instant connection to her. I took the time to respond, pouring my heart into my words, hoping to offer some comfort. It was in that moment that I realized the power of sharing our stories. It was more than just writing. It was building a community. As the weeks passed, my blog began to gain traction. I was invited to participate in online workshops and discussions about authenticity in writing. I learned about the importance of vulnerability and how sharing our truths can resonate with others in profound ways. Each new interaction fueled my passion even more. I felt like a puzzle piece that had finally found its place. But, as I immersed myself in this new world, I was also faced with the realities of my old life. The holidays were approaching, and with them came the familiar pressure of family gatherings. I braced myself for the inevitable conversations that would arise, the questions about my life choices, my career, and my relationship status. I could already hear the probing inquiries echoing in my mind. When are you settling down? Why don't you have a real job? You're still blogging? Isn't that just a hobby? I decided to confront the elephant in the room head-on. It was time for a family meeting, a chance to lay it all out on the table. As I prepared for this confrontation, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I knew that this was my opportunity to assert my independence and share my truth. I wanted to be clear about my path and the fact that I was no longer willing to live by anyone else's definition of success. When the day arrived, I gathered my family around the dining table. The usual festive decorations adorned the room, but I felt a heaviness in the air. I took a deep breath and began to speak, pouring out my heart and sharing my journey. I recounted the challenges I faced and the growth I experienced. I expressed my gratitude for their support, but emphasized my desire to carve my own path. To my surprise, the atmosphere shifted from apprehension to curiosity. My family listened, truly listened, as I shared my vision for the future. They began to ask questions, not with judgment, but with genuine interest. It felt liberating to articulate my dreams and aspirations without fear of rejection. I could see their expressions soften as I spoke, and I realized that they might have been just as scared of losing me as I was of disappointing them. But, as the conversation flowed, the inevitable topic of my eviction came up. I could feel the tension rising again. It was time to address the elephant. I explained how I had made the difficult decision to leave my previous living situation, how it had been a necessary step toward reclaiming my life. I shared how I had come to view it not as a failure, but as a catalyst for my transformation. That's when my uncle chimed in with a comment that took me by surprise. "You know, this is only for family," he said, referring to the holidays and our gatherings. "We're supposed to support each other, right?" I felt a pang in my chest. It stung. How could he not see that I was trying to redefine what family meant to me? I took a moment, swallowing my initial reaction, and responded, "I agree. But family can also mean allowing each other the freedom to grow and to explore who we truly are." For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then, a voice from my cousin chimed in. "I think it's brave what you're doing. I wish I had the courage to pursue my passions like you." Those words hit me like a warm embrace. It was a reminder that vulnerability can inspire others to embrace their truths. As the evening progressed, I felt a sense of camaraderie forming around the table. My family started to share their own struggles and aspirations. It was a cathartic moment, one that I had never anticipated. Our conversations shifted from the mundane to the deeply personal, and I realized that we were all navigating our own paths, each filled with its own challenges. I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a reminder that we were all in this together, even if our journeys looked different. The night ended with laughter and a newfound understanding of one another. I had entered that gathering feeling apprehensive, but I left with a sense of relief and hope. I realized that I didn't have to choose between my family and my dreams. Instead, I could forge a new understanding that encompassed both. It was a pivotal moment, one that solidified my belief in the importance of authenticity, not just for myself, but for those around me as well. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I had come. Each step, each conversation, each moment of vulnerability brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. The more I embraced my truth, the more I inspired others to do the same. It wasn't just about creating a blog or sharing my story. It was about building a legacy of authenticity and connection. And as I continued down this path, I couldn't help but wonder what the next chapter would hold. The following weeks after that Christmas dinner felt like a quiet revolution in my life. I had taken the first step toward bridging the gap between my aspirations and my family's expectations, but I was acutely aware that it was just the beginning. As I sat at my desk, the morning sun filtering through the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that change was brewing. I had begun writing more consistently, pouring my heart into my blog, sharing my experiences and insights with a growing audience. Each post felt like a thread weaving a tapestry of my life, colorful and intricate, but I also felt the weight of my family's opinions lingering in the back of my mind. I could hear my mother's voice echoing from years past, her dismissive tone when I first mentioned my dreams. I knew that not everyone would understand my journey, but I was becoming more resolute in my commitment to myself. My blog had turned into a platform for me to share my story and connect with others who felt the same tug between family obligations and personal aspirations. I began receiving messages from strangers who resonated with my journey, each message a reminder that I wasn't alone. One crisp Saturday morning, I decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. I invited my parents over for coffee. I knew it was a bold move, but I felt ready. I wanted to share my progress and, more importantly, my dreams for the future. As I brewed the coffee, I practiced what I wanted to say, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I hoped they would see how much I had grown and that they would be proud of the woman I was becoming. When they arrived, I greeted them with a warm smile, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the weather and the latest family gossip. I could feel the tension building, a quiet storm brewing in the air. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided it was now or never. Mom, Dad, I've been working on my blog and I wanted to share some of it with you. I think it could help you understand where I'm coming from. Their expressions shifted immediately. Curiosity mingled with apprehension. I could see my mother's brow furrow, and my father's lips pressed into a thin line. I opened my laptop and showed them a few of my recent posts. As I read excerpts aloud, I watched their reactions closely. My mother's eyes softened slightly, but my father remained stoic. I finished with a piece about chasing dreams and the importance of authenticity. "This is who I am," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not asking for your approval, but I hope you can see my passion and where I'm headed." There was a beat of silence. My heart raced as I anxiously awaited their response. "It's good," my mother finally said, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and hesitation. "I can see you've put a lot of thought into this." But my father remained quiet, lost in thought. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I reminded myself that this conversation was just one step in a larger journey. Over the next few weeks, I continued to write and share my experiences. My blog began gaining traction, and I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. I started connecting with other bloggers, attending virtual workshops, and even collaborating with a few. The community around me began to grow, and the support I received was heartwarming. Yet, amidst the excitement, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to address my father's lingering disapproval. It came to a head one evening when my parents came over for dinner. As we sat around the table, I could feel the tension hanging in the air again. After a few bites of my homemade lasagna, I decided to take the plunge. "Dad, can we talk about my blog? I feel like there's still some misunderstanding between us." My heart raced as I braced myself for his response. He paused, fork midair, and looked at me, searching for the right words. "Honey, I just worry. You're putting yourself out there in a way that can be dangerous. What if it doesn't work out? What if people don't like what you have to say?" His concerns were genuine, but they stung nonetheless. I knew he cared for me, but it felt like he couldn't see my perspective. "Dad, I understand your concerns, but this is my journey. I'm learning and growing through this process. It's not just about success or failure. It's about being true to myself." My voice was steady, but I could feel the tremor of vulnerability beneath it. "I want to share my story, and I hope you can support me in that, even if it's uncomfortable for you." He looked away, staring down at his plate, and my heart sank. I wanted him to understand, to see me for who I was becoming, but I feared I was losing him in the process. That evening, I went to bed feeling drained. It was tough to navigate the emotional terrain of family dynamics while pursuing my dreams, but I held on to the hope that one day he would come around. As the weeks turned into months, I kept sharing my journey online, and my readership continued to grow. I had started to receive opportunities for guest blogging and collaborations that felt like a dream come true. Each new connection was a step toward the life I had envisioned for myself. Yet my father's voice echoed in the back of my mind, his concerns a reminder of the delicate balance I was trying to maintain. I often found myself reflecting on the meaning of family and the expectations that come with it. Was it possible to honor my family while also pursuing my passions? I knew that I needed to find a way to reconcile these two worlds, to create a space where both could coexist. As I navigated this journey, I realized that it was about more than just my relationship with my father. It was a reflection of the larger struggle many face between familial loyalty and personal ambition. I was learning that authenticity often comes with a cost, but it was a price I was willing to pay. I remember one particular evening when I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through the messages and comments from my followers. It was a quiet moment, one that felt almost sacred amidst the chaos of my thoughts. I had just finished a piece about chasing dreams against the backdrop of familial expectations, and the response was overwhelming. People were sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph, and I felt an unexpected surge of connection. It was as if I had opened a door to a room full of souls who understood exactly what I was going through. Yet, amidst that validation, my father's skepticism loomed large. As I lay in bed that night, I thought back to Christmas dinner, the moment when I had handed him that eviction notice. The mix of disbelief and anger on his face was etched into my memory. I could still hear the silence that followed, heavy with unspoken words. My heart had raced as I watched him process what I had done, the weight of my decision hanging between us like a chasm. I hadn't intended to hurt him. I just wanted to assert my independence. But in that moment, I realized I had crossed a line. The days following that dinner were a blur. I threw myself into my work, using it as both a distraction and a catalyst for change. I started to attend workshops, connecting with other creators and entrepreneurs who were navigating similar paths. Each session filled me with renewed energy and purpose, but my father's disappointment still gnawed at me. I had hoped that time would heal the rift between us, but every time I picked up my phone to call him, I hesitated. Then, one afternoon, while I was drafting a blog post about resilience, I received a text from my mother. She had been my confidant throughout this ordeal, and her message was simple but powerful. "He's hurting, but he loves you. You know that, right?" My heart sank. I wanted to believe that love could bridge the gap between us, but how could I convince him to understand my perspective? I decided it was time for a conversation. My heart raced as I dialed his number, each ring echoing my uncertainty. When he picked up, there was a moment of silence before I finally spoke. I cautiously expressed my desire to meet, to talk, to find a way back to each other. After a brief pause that felt like an eternity, he agreed, and we set a time to meet at our favorite cafe. The day of our meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. I arrived early, nursing a cup of coffee as I replayed our past conversations in my mind. I recalled the times we shared laughter, the lessons he had taught me, and the values he instilled in me. But I also remembered the moments of tension, the arguments that had erupted over dinner tables, and the way he had always questioned my choices. When he walked in, I noticed the weariness etched on his face. We exchanged pleasantries, but the air was thick with unspoken words. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before diving in. I started by sharing my journey, how the online community had become a lifeline for me, how writing had transformed my life. I spoke about the joy it brought me, the connections I had made, and the people I had inspired. To my surprise, he listened. His expression softened as I spoke, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was being heard. As I shared my dreams and aspirations, I could see the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. I explained that my eviction notice wasn't about rejection. It was about my need to carve out a space for myself. I needed to prove that I could stand on my own 2 feet, to show him that I wasn't running away, but rather I was embracing my own path. As I spoke, I watched as his defenses crumbled. He shared his fears, his worries about my future, and how difficult it had been for him to let go. We discussed the balance of tradition and ambition, a dance I had been trying to master for so long. The conversation flowed more freely than I had anticipated, and with each exchange, I felt the walls between us beginning to crumble. By the end of our meeting, I felt a sense of hope. We hadn't completely resolved everything, but we had made progress. He had promised to try and understand my choices, and I had promised to keep him in the loop, to share my journey with him rather than shutting him out. As we parted ways, I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Returning home, I couldn't shake the feeling of optimism that filled me. It wasn't a magic fix, and I knew there would still be bumps along the road, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was ready to embrace both my dreams and my family, to navigate this delicate dance with grace. Over the next few weeks, I poured my energy into my writing, eager to share the ups and downs of my journey with my audience. I began to incorporate stories of my relationship with my father, sharing the lessons I was learning about love, ambition, and family. The response was incredible. People resonated with my struggles, and I found myself connected to a community that was not only supportive but also inspiring. I realized that my journey wasn't just mine. It was intertwined with the lives of others who were facing their own battles between family and dreams. As I moved forward, I kept reminding myself that it was okay to seek balance, to pursue my passions while honoring my roots. I was learning that family was not just about shared blood, but also about shared understanding, and that sometimes the hardest conversations could lead to the most profound connections. I was learning that family was not just about shared blood, but also about shared understanding, and that sometimes the hardest conversations could lead to the most profound connections. But as I dove deeper into my writing, I found myself at a crossroads that I hadn't anticipated. One evening, while I was typing away at my laptop, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she was upset. "Can you come over? We need to talk," she said, her tone heavy with unspoken words. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had been feeling optimistic, but there was something about her urgency that hinted at trouble. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my heart racing as I drove to their house. When I arrived, my father was sitting in his usual armchair, a scowl etched on his face. My mother was pacing the floor, her hands wringing together. I took a deep breath and sat down, bracing myself for whatever was to come. "Your father and I have been discussing the family business," she started, her voice trembling. My father interjected before she could finish. It's time you understood, Sarah. We can't keep supporting your dreams if it means compromising the family legacy. I felt the air leave my lungs. The family legacy. Those words hung between us like a storm cloud, ready to burst. I had spent so long chasing my dreams, believing that it was possible to honor both my ambitions and my family's expectations. But now, it felt like I was being pulled in two different directions, and the tension was palpable. Are you saying that I need to choose? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. My father leaned forward, his eyes piercing into mine. You need to understand that this isn't just about you. It's about the sacrifices we've made for this business, for our family. We can't have you off chasing stories while everything we built crumbles. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I fought to keep my composure. I wanted to scream that my dreams were valid, that they mattered just as much as the family business. But instead, I took a deep breath and tried to articulate my perspective. I love you both, and I appreciate everything you've done for me. But I have to follow my path, even if it means stepping away from the family business. It's not that I want to abandon it, it's that I want to create something of my own. My mother looked at me with a mixture of sadness and understanding, but my father remained unmoved. You don't understand the implications, Sarah. What happens if you fail? What happens if you decide to walk away completely? The business can't survive on dreams. The conversation spiraled into a heated debate, with emotions flaring and old wounds reopening. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, and I was terrified of what might happen if I stood my ground. But I knew I had to, for my own sanity. I had fought too hard to let my dreams slip away now. After what felt like hours, the discussion ended without resolution. I left their house feeling hollow, the bitterness of unresolved conflict lingering in my chest. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into my writing, channeling my emotions into words. But every time I sat down at my desk, I felt the weight of my father's disappointment pressing down on me. I started to question everything. Was I being selfish? Was it wrong to want more for myself? To pursue my passion at the expense of my family's legacy? I found myself scrolling through old photos of the family business, memories of laughter and hard work, and a pang of guilt washed over me. It wasn't until I received a message from a follower on social media that things began to shift. She shared her own story of breaking away from family expectations to pursue her dreams. Her words were raw and resonated deeply with me. You have to do what's right for you, even if it hurts. Your happiness matters. Those words struck a chord. I realized I wasn't alone in this struggle. Many people face the daunting task of balancing their desires with familial obligations. I decided to share my feelings in a post, expressing my doubts and fears about pursuing my passion while navigating family expectations. The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in from people who had faced similar dilemmas, offering support and encouragement. That night, I sat with my laptop, my heart racing as I drafted a new piece. I wrote about the complexity of family dynamics, the love that often feels conditional, and the courage it takes to step into the unknown. My words flowed like a river, unrestrained and powerful. I poured my heart into that piece, knowing that it might not change my family's mind, but it might resonate with someone out there who felt just as lost. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of notifications. My post had gone viral, garnering thousands of comments. People were sharing their stories, their struggles, their victories. I felt a sense of connection that I had longed for, a reminder that I was part of something bigger. I was reminded that pursuing dreams didn't have to mean abandoning my family. It could mean finding a way to honor both. Feeling inspired, I decided to invite my parents to a dinner where we could talk openly, away from the tension of business discussions. I wanted to bridge the gap between us and show them that I could be both their daughter and a dreamer. I hoped this would be a step toward healing the rift that had formed between us. As I prepared for the dinner, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Would this be the moment we could begin to understand each other again? The evening arrived, and as I set the table, I carefully placed my grandmother's old china, a symbol of tradition and family history. I wanted this dinner to feel special, a blend of the past and the present. My heart raced as I lit the candles, their flickering flames dancing in the dim light. I took a moment to breathe deeply, reminding myself that this was about more than just food. This was about healing, about bringing my family together, and about stepping into my own truth. When my parents walked in, I could sense the tension in the air. They exchanged glances, and I could see the questions lingering in their eyes. My mother, always the one to smooth over discomfort, forced a smile, while my father's expression was more guarded, a mask of curiosity and concern. I greeted them warmly, inviting them to sit down. As we settled into our seats, I served the meal, taking extra care with each dish. I wanted to create an atmosphere that felt safe, where we could speak freely. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled the room, mingling with the warmth of the candles. I could see my mother's eyes soften as she took a bite, momentarily lost in the nostalgia of home-cooked meals. "Wow, this is delicious," she said, and I saw a flicker of pride in her gaze. I smiled, hoping this was a good sign. We chatted about the weather, the recent holidays, and the family traditions we had cherished over the years. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing the familiar with the unknown. I knew I had to bring up the elephant in the room, but I wanted to do it delicately. "Can we talk about something important?" I finally ventured, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. My parents exchanged glances again, and I could feel their apprehension. "Sure, honey. What's on your mind?" my father replied, his tone measured, as if he were bracing for impact. I took a deep breath, my resolve strengthening. "I want to share my dreams with you, and I hope you'll hear me out. I know things have been strained between us, especially since I decided to pursue my passion for writing. I understand that you see it differently, more like a distraction than a career path, but it's part of who I am." My mother looked at me, her expression softening. "We just worry about you, sweetie. You know that. We want you to have a stable future." "I know you do," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude for their concern. "But I've been stable in a way that doesn't fulfill me. I want to create stories, to connect with people through my words. This isn't just a whim. It's my calling." The room fell silent as they processed my words. I could almost see the gears turning in my father's mind. "And what does that mean for us? For the family business?" I had anticipated this question. "I'm not abandoning it, Dad. I want to find a way to integrate my dreams with our family legacy. I believe that we can support each other in our pursuits without sacrificing our bonds." My mother leaned back in her chair, her eyes searching mine. "But what if it doesn't work out? What if you struggle?" "Then I will learn and grow. Just like any journey," I replied, my voice stronger now. "I'd rather take the risk and pursue what I love than stay in a comfort zone that stifles me. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for understanding." My father's brow furrowed, and I could see the conflict within him. "It's just hard for us to see you take this path. We built this business with blood, sweat, and tears." "And I respect that," I said, my heart swelling with empathy. "But I also want to build something of my own. Something that reflects who I am. I hope you can see that it doesn't have to be one or the other." The conversation began to shift. Their expressions softened further. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "We just want you to be happy." "I am happy when I write," I said, a tear escaping my eye. "I'm inviting you into my world. I want you to understand what it means to me. I hope we can find a way to support each other, even if we don't fully understand each other's paths." We spent the rest of the evening sharing stories, laughing, and reminiscing about the past while cautiously navigating the future. It felt like a breakthrough, a crack in the walls that had kept us apart. I watched as my parents began to see me in a new light, not just as their daughter, but as an individual with dreams and aspirations. As the night came to a close, we cleared the table together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of unity. I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner was a turning point, a small step towards mending the rift between us. My heart swelled with hope as I reflected on the evening, believing that we were finally moving forward, inch by inch, towards understanding. The days that followed Christmas felt different. The air was lighter, charged with the possibility of change. I spent hours writing, capturing the essence of that night and the emotions it stirred within me. I penned down my thoughts on family, dreams, and the sometimes uncomfortable reality of pursuing what you love. There was a newfound energy in my words, as if the universe was buoying me up in support. I remember thinking, maybe this is what they meant by healing. But with every step forward, there always seemed to be a shadow lurking behind me. I was still living under my parents' roof, a place that had once felt like home, but now felt more like a prison. I loved my family, but the weight of their expectations hung heavily on my shoulders. I craved freedom, the space to breathe and create without the constant hum of doubt in my ear. One evening, while tidying up my workspace, I stumbled upon a stack of eviction notices I had received over the past few months. Each one was a stark reminder of the reality I was trying to escape, a reminder that my dreams had been sidelined in favor of stability. I took a moment to reflect on the idea of eviction, not just in a physical sense, but emotionally too. I had to evict the fear and the suffocating expectations that had settled in my heart. I realized that if I didn't take charge of my own life, I would remain trapped in a cycle of resentment, both towards myself and my family. The following week, I sat down to have a serious conversation with my parents. I needed to express how I felt, how their well-meaning intentions were sometimes more of a burden than a blessing. The thought of it made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. I prepared for the conversation, rehearsing the words in my head, trying to find the right way to convey my feelings without hurting them. "Can we talk?" I asked one evening after dinner, my heart racing as I saw the puzzled expressions on their faces. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" my father said, looking up from his newspaper. I took a deep breath, my palms sweaty as I leaned forward. "I've been thinking a lot about my life and my dreams. I love you both, and I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I need to share something that's been weighing on me." I watched as my parents exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. "What is it?" my mother asked softly. "I feel like I'm living in a world that doesn't allow me to pursue what I truly want. I know you both have good intentions, but it often feels like I'm being suffocated by your expectations." The words rushed out of me, fueled by a mix of fear and determination. My father furrowed his brow. "We just want what's best for you." "I understand that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But what's best for me is to find my own way, to make my own mistakes, and to chase my own dreams, even if they look different from what you envisioned for me." There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension in the room thickening. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But we just want to protect you. We worry about your future." "I appreciate that, Mom, but I need to live my own life. I can't do that if I'm constantly worrying about disappointing you. I need to evict those fears from my mind." The metaphor felt powerful in that moment, a rallying cry for my own autonomy. "Evict?" my father echoed, a hint of confusion in his voice. "Evict the fears, the expectations, the pressure. I want to create a life that feels authentic to me. It's not about rejecting you or your dreams for me. It's about embracing my own." As I spoke, I felt an unexpected sense of release, like I was shedding a heavy coat that had been weighing me down for far too long. "I want you both to support me, not to hold me back. I need to find my own footing." My parents' silence was deafening, and for a moment I feared I had crossed a line that I couldn't come back from. But then I saw the realization flicker in their eyes. They were beginning to understand. "I think I get it," my mother said finally, wiping away a tear. "It's just hard for us to let go. We love you so much, and we want to keep you safe." "I know," I said, my voice softening, "but safety isn't the same as happiness. I need your support to be happy, and that means giving me the space to explore what that looks like." My father sighed, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "We'll try to do better," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I can't promise it will be easy, but we'll work on it." As we continued talking, I felt a shift in our dynamic, a willingness to let go of the past and embrace the unknown future together. I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter for us all, one where my dreams and my family could coexist without one overshadowing the other. And in that moment, I knew I had truly begun the process of eviction, removing the barriers that had kept me from both my family and my dreams. It was liberating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally stepping into my own light. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across our living room, I sat in a newfound stillness, letting the conversation with my parents wash over me. It felt like a gentle wave, smoothing out the rough edges of our past. I could feel the air thick with unspoken words and emotions, but this time, they weren't as suffocating. I had voiced my truth, and in return, they had offered me something invaluable, a chance to grow without the constant weight of their fears dragging me down. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect, but it felt like we were finally on the same page. The history of our misunderstandings and miscommunications was still there, but it was softer now, more manageable. I could see my parents trying to bridge the gap, learning to trust not just me, but also themselves in this new role as supportive allies rather than guardians of my dreams. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of hope and apprehension. Was it really possible for us to navigate this new territory together? As days turned into weeks, I began to explore my passions with a renewed vigor. I enrolled in an art class that had been calling my name for years, the very one I had shied away from because I worried about what my parents would think. I remembered the first day I walked into that studio, the scent of paint lingering in the air, the sound of brushes dancing across canvas. It was exhilarating. I felt alive. I poured my heart and soul into every piece I created, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify my choices. I was embracing my creativity, and it was liberating. My parents noticed the change in me too. They saw my excitement and the spark in my eyes when I shared my latest projects. At first, it was tentative, those small conversations about my artwork punctuated by their cautious pride. But slowly, their walls began to crumble, and they allowed themselves to be part of my journey. I remember one evening when I invited them to my first art show. My heart raced as I stood next to my pieces, each one a fragment of my soul displayed for the world to see. My parents walked in, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Would they understand? Would they be proud? As they wandered through the gallery, I caught glimpses of their reactions, wide eyes, soft smiles, and whispered conversations between themselves. It was as if they were finally seeing me, the real me, for the first time. When they reached my favorite piece, a large canvas splashed with vibrant colors and intricate patterns, they paused. I held my breath, waiting. My mother's hand instinctively reached for my father's, and they both stood there, absorbed in the work, lost in its story. In that moment, I realized they were no longer just my parents. They were my biggest supporters. The tears in my mother's eyes mirrored the pride in her voice as she finally said, "You've truly found your voice, haven't you?" Those words resonated deeply within me. I had spent so long feeling trapped, trying to align my life with their expectations. And now, here I was, free. It was a journey of self-discovery, one where I had to first confront my fears and then advocate for my happiness. I looked at my parents, and for the first time, I felt like we were all on this path together, no longer pulling in opposite directions. Of course, there were moments of tension, moments when old habits crept back in. There were disagreements about my choices and fears creeping back into conversations. But now, I had the tools to navigate those conversations, to remind them gently of our commitment to support one another. I often asked myself, what would I have done differently had I not started this journey? It was a powerful reminder that growth isn't always linear. It's a series of steps, some forward, some back. As I continued to pour myself into my art, I also began to expand my horizons beyond the canvas. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to kids who needed an outlet just like I had. The joy in their eyes when they created something beautiful was contagious. It ignited something within me, this urge to give back, to share what I had learned through my own struggles. Seeing them thrive and express themselves filled my heart with a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. Looking back now, I realized that the journey I embarked on wasn't just about finding my passion. It was about redefining my relationship with my family and myself. I had to challenge the narrative that had been set for me and write my own. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but the moment I chose to embrace my truth was the moment everything shifted. As I reflect on this entire experience, I'm filled with gratitude. Gratitude for my parents, who eventually chose love over fear. Gratitude for the courage I found within myself to confront difficult conversations. And gratitude for the community that embraced me and my art. If you're on a similar journey, if you're feeling trapped between your dreams and the expectations of those you love, I encourage you to take that leap. What would you do if you felt completely free to follow your dreams? Let me know below. Life is too short to live in the shadows of someone else's vision. We all have our own unique light to shine, and it's time to let it illuminate the world.